Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, friends and colleagues from across the world. Thank you for joining us today for the special edition Podinar, which I'm very excited about. As a guest, we have today Dr. Arlen Myers, MD, MBA. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks very much for having me.
It's very exciting to share this session with my colleagues since I personally became a member of SOAP, the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs, which has had an impact in my career, a tremendous impact, and it would be an honor to have this invitation extended to our colleagues. So you are the president and CEO of Society of Physician Entrepreneurs, a much needed concept. I'd like to familiarize our audience a little bit with your background and what it is that you do. Dr. Arlen Myers helps people get their biomedical ideas to patients by teaching, writing, speaking, and consulting. He's a professor emeritus of otolaryngology, dentistry, and engineering at the University of Colorado School of Medicine, a faculty member at the University of Colorado Denver Business School, and the president and CEO of the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs, which we'll discuss today. Dr. Myers has created several medical devices and digital health companies, some of which were not successful. His primary research focuses on biomedical and health innovation and entrepreneurship, as well as the commercialization of life science technologies. Yes, we do indeed learn from our not so successful operations to create bigger things. He teaches at the University of Colorado Denver and consults with and speaks to companies, governments, colleges, and universities worldwide, offering his expertise and network in areas such as entrepreneurship, bioscience, healthcare IT, medical tourism, new product development, product design, and financing new ventures. A former Harvard Macy Fellow, Dr. Myers also completed a Fellowship at King's Business, the Commercialization Office of Technology Transfer at King's College in London in 2010. His publication includes Building the Case for Biotechnology, Optical Detection of Cancer, the Life Science Innovation Roadmap, and the Digital Health Entrepreneurship. He is the editor-in-chief of Medscape Reference, otolaryngology, head and neck surgery, and teaches entrepreneurship at the University of Colorado Denver Graduate School, School of Medicine, as well as the Business School. He has authored numerous books, blogs, and articles, and is the editor of the second edition of Digital Health Entrepreneurship. He also writes a newsletter on biomedical and clinical entrepreneurship on Substack. So I've been following your work for quite some years. You're a very unique individual. What drives you, Dr. Arlen, to connect doctors from all these disciplines to collaborate and improve their practice and professionally advance?
So, they say there's nothing worse than a reformed sinner. So, the thing that motivates me and motivated me to begin with was anger. Um, some people confuse passion with anger or other internal motivators, and we can talk about that. But the short story is during my tenure as an academic surgeon, myself and several other people invented a gadget that optically detects cancer in the mouth, something that is near and dear to your heart and other dentists and oral surgeons and other dental professionals around the world. So, as you well know, uh, uh, there's a need for early detection of oral cancer. But unfortunately, most of the time when you look in somebody's mouth, you don't know what it is. Could be leukoplakia, it could be something there, a bump, a white spot, a red spot. I mean, a whole bunch of stuff, but you don't know whether it's really cancer or not. And actually, to this day, you basically have to. I mean, if you have a high enough clinical suspicion, you biopsy, and that leaves a hole in somebody's mouth that then has to heal for 3 weeks. And then you got to send it to pathology, and then you got to deal with it, et cetera, et cetera. So I thought, well, wouldn't it be nice if we could optically detect the presence or absence of cancer in the mouth without having to cut anything? So essentially, we created this gadget that, for all intents and purposes, was a Geiger counter for cancer in the mouth. So, and without going into the bioengineering and the biophotonics and all that other stuff, and I am not a biomedical engineer. I have just told you as much as I know about biomedical engineering, as I know. But the point is, we invented the gadget. We meaning the team, and uh, and so I went through, at the time, I was working at the University of Colorado. When we went through the traditional tech transfer process, we created a company. We went through the intellectual property stuff and got a patent. And then at that point, it was like, okay, what do we do now? And again, long story short, I couldn't find the right ecosystem to help me get this idea past the goal line. I certainly wasn't being taught it in medical school, residency, and training. I couldn't find the right resources in the community to help me do this. I had no clue how to raise money. I had nothing about go-to-market strategies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So so we never got this idea past the goal line. I mean, at this point, actually, the intellectual property is still sitting on a shelf somewhere. But the point is, I learned here. So here's what I learned. One, every doctor that I know in every white coat, dentists, pharmacists, graduate students, engineers, every one of them thinks they have a good idea, including me at the time. Number two, the vast majority of those ideas, including me, were not good ideas. I mean, they were simply good ideas. They were not commercializable ideas to get it to an invention, to get it to, let alone a commercial product, let alone an innovation. The third was I couldn't find the right people to help me. And even if it were a good idea, the ecosystem wasn't there to help me develop this thing. And particularly for those that were curious but clueless, like me, when I started this thing. So the more I looked around, and it made me angry. I didn't like the idea because I'm figuring I'm not the only person that's in this situation. So there really must be some, I mean, it's an unmet need. It's like entrepreneurship 101. So you identify like an unmet need, then you figure out, try to fill it. And so after many, many iterations of trying to get this worked out, that was the impetus to create the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs, so that other people wouldn't have to go through what I went through if they had an idea that had potential.
That's an excellent and noble mission. But there's more to this. Most of the doctors that I collaborate with, as you mentioned, they believe they have the next multi-billion dollar, trillion dollar idea, and this comes out of just about every one of them. They're sort of isolated in their own worlds. And you wrote some articles about how to breaking that silo. But before I get to that, we need that feedback from other doctors to see if it's commercially viable product. But when you created soap, you weren't really actually after monetizing. I've worked with you for a couple of years now, and I've been following your work for years. You just, out of selflessness, connect people with one another. You don't ask for anything. That's very unusual because most people, most doctors, that's a big problem, covet the intellectual property. There's always all these NDAs back and forth and this, and somebody wants some kind of a fee out of this introduction. And but you never ask anything. Why is that? Although you connect so many people, you've connected me to at least 10 different people. Why? What is your end goal?
Well, first of all, I'm not a saint. I mean, most people do things, including me, out of self-interest. And this is not a new idea. This goes back to capitalism, the beginning of capitalism. Uh, I mean, so I don't want to give the impression like I'm some altruistic saint just doing this for the good of mankind. I'm doing this because intrinsically it satisfies my self-interest. That is, I'm an educator, I'm a medical teacher, I'm a person that likes to create. It satisfies my intrinsic self-interest. That's what motivates. Now, it so happens um, that, like capitalistic economics, the theory is self-interest serves society through competition in the marketplace. So it's not a new idea. Um, But I just was so for and oh by the way, I do a lot of other things. So in some sense, to be honest, my and let me just mention that SOAP is a nonprofit. So what did I know about creating a nonprofit when I started? Well, we started this, myself and some other people. Nothing. I had no clue how to start a nonprofit. So that was another learning experience, and we eventually did it. So why do people create nonprofits? Because as a social entrepreneur, they're trying to make the world a better place. Because most of us go into sick care. We can talk about why it's not healthcare, but most of us go into sick care because for some small or large reason, we're trying to help people. And because my entrepreneurial brain told me that this was an unmet need that needed to be filled. And oh, by
Yes.
the way, as a result of doing this activity, I got involved, none of which I could have predicted, in things that eventually made me money. So it's a portfolio of things, and it seems to have worked out.
There's a good saying, if you take care of the other person's needs in business, your needs will be taken care of. And that's a great approach to the problem. For our colleagues, if you are interested, if you fall into any of these categories or you're interested in any of these categories to collaborate with, I would go to, as you guys saw, it's merely $80 to join this operation, but you will get access to a lot of people, a lot of innovation, a lot of doors will open up for you, and we'll talk about why they're significant. I agree with your approach. I wish more individuals would do that. And you can learn more about this at sopenet.org. So back to your experiences. I see you have at least 40 different positions you have held and some capacity at the C level. You spent 29 years with WebMD as one after the other, leading organizations that are involved. Now, recently, you have picked up this partnership with the Medical Intelligence Group, the Artificial Intelligence in Medicine, as well as the American Board of Artificial Intelligence in Medicine. Um, what is your take about where the healthcare industry is heading as a profession, given artificial intelligence?
Um, I think that I mean it's a good news, bad news story. So first of all, uh, so let me just reflect on the fact that the iPhone was launched in 2007, June of 2007. Could anyone back then have predicted the impact of the iPhone now? I mean, if you lose your phone, you're screwed. Your whole life revolves around the phone. So what that tells me is we have no clue where artificial intelligence is going to take us. There's a well-known phrase that these kinds of technologies are always over the value, are always overestimated in the short run and underestimated in the long run. We have no clue where this is going to take us. Now, if you're asking me, where do I think we are now? I think that there is a conflict and an evolving balance between the technophiliacs, those that love this stuff and it's going to change the world, and the techno skeptics that say, wait a minute, we have no idea where this is going to take us, and we're too many people are going rogue. So, do I think at present that and when it gets to the bottom line in terms of sick care, how has artificial intelligence to date impacted the sextuple aims? Has artificial intelligence reduced the aggregate cost of sick care? Let's just take the United States. No. Has artificial intelligence improve the quality of care? Possibly. Has artificial intelligence improved the patient experience? I don't think we have enough information to know that. I mean, if you just ask a patient, what do you think about artificial intelligence answering the last email you sent to your doctor, you're going to get mixed views. Even if the doctor or the PA or the nurse practitioner edits the AI chat GPT response to the email inbox, which is a big source of problem right now, it's hard to tell. Has it improved the doctor experience? Well, there's a lot of hype about how ambient AI has, quote, relieved or cured burnout. I don't really think it has. And in some instances, it actually adds more work because now you got to edit everything and you got to make sure that it's okay and it's not biased and it's not hallucinating and it's not all that other stuff. Has it lessened waste? I would argue that it's trashing the planet. And with electric grids and power and people buying a nuclear reactor to run the damn things, I think the only part of the sextuple aim that has benefited to date are the tech bros that have created them in terms of shareholder value of your stock. So if you're asking me, are we better off now with artificial intelligence as measured by the sextuple aims? I would say no. And in fact, not everybody, a lot of people are alluding to the fact, if you look at the Gartner hype cycle, that we are entering the trough of disillusionment with artificial intelligence because it's not everything it was cranked up to be. Does that mean I think we should trash it and forget about it? Of course not. The cat's out of the bag. But I think we have to be pretty circumspect about not overstating its benefits or understating its deleterious effects.
A very thorough analysis of the situation. Yes, it's a formula for disaster, I think, given that all of these innovations are coming out, they're unregulated, uh, um, there's no oversight, there's no advocacy, there's no regulation around it, and it's creating a lot of problems in commerce. There are integration issues everywhere now with all these programs popping up to integrate with the management softwares and so on. That I'm regularly on podcasts having these discussions with leaders of industry, and it's becoming evident it's more challenging than it is. And, article after article says the healthcare providers are last to go if these bizarre theories about artificial intelligence come true, and that artificial intelligence doesn't have a license to practice medicine, so we'll always be around in some capacity unless that's changed. Do you agree with that?
No. In fact, today there was an article where the Mayo Clinic is shutting down 6 of their rural hospitals in Minnesota because they don't have enough people to staff them. And the manpower pipeline is a separate issue. Number two, what they were saying was that given the current environment, that they need to replace people with artificial intelligence. Now, are they replacing doctors and nurses with artificial intelligence? And this gets to the most recent labor unemployment numbers, that the growth of the job market is essentially dead. The only thing that is keeping it alive, one of the categories, is healthcare. Unfortunately, the vast majority of the healthcare jobs have to do with home health aides, not doctors and nurses. Now, do I think that ultimately some doctors will be replaced, or maybe even now are being replaced? Yes. But it's going to be in very specific situations. Do I think that radiologists are going to go away, like some people have predicted many, many years ago? No. But I think this business of the so-called physician work pipeline and the physician shortage, if you're a contrarian, you could make the argument that there's a medical school bubble because we're training too many doctors using an old business model and not looking forward to a different business model and appropriately using the right number of doctors we need.
It's a
So
very good point.
yeah, so I think if you're planning workforce development and the workforce pipeline looking through the rearview mirror, that's not going to work.
Things with dental schools and medical schools take time, with the accreditation bodies and the system that built around it for the last 50 years. So this should be very interesting how the adoption is going to work and how you're going to convince these educational institutions to start acting like they're in the 21st century. But yeah,
Let me
well,
also mention that the number of students, undergrads, applying to medical school reached a peak just at the end of the COVID epidemic, the so-called Fauci effect. The number of pre-meds applying, or so-called pre-meds applying to medical school, has dropped for the last 2 years. It's down by about 3.5 to 4%. So what that says to me is that we are seeing trickle down generational impact, particularly with Gen Z. And they're saying, you know what? I'm not signing up for this.
yeah, and it's a whole different environment when you and later I signed up for this, and it's not as rosy as it used to be, as you know. Um, so okay, well, you create some possible and plausible situations where these things can be remedied and improved and sort of guided in our own hands. You published an article that said we need interprofessional, transdisciplinary, and cross-functional biomedical entrepreneurship education and collaboration. You say in that article it's time for interprofessional entrepreneurship where members of multiple disciplines, not just one, collaborate to pursue opportunity under conditions of uncertainty. We are in conditions of uncertainty, with the goal of creating user-patient defined value through the deployment of innovation. How do you envision doctors, at the institute, at our Global Summits Institute, we try to collaborate with the nurse, with the chiropractors, with the medical doctors, with the pharmacists and optometrists, and so on. And it's usually a limited scenario. We're trying to increase that in London, as you know, with all of these 8 different organizations. But what did you envision when you made that statement?
Well, I think we have to ask ourselves, why do we have interprofessional innovation silos? In other words, why don't healthcare professionals, medicine, dentistry, nursing, pharmacy, public health, why don't we play nice together? And my answer to that question, and there's a whole long list, but just to keep it short, I think there are three main buckets. In other words, what is the etiology of innovation silos and professional silos? So I would lump those into three main buckets. One is, and I call this curriculum, culture, and context. So what do I mean by that? I mean that the medical education system and the dental education system and the pharmacy education system, in my view, has lost touch with their market. In medicine, it been over 100 and something years before it was substantively reformed in terms of curriculum. So I think the medical education writ large industry is suffering from what's been referred to as academia. It's sclerotic. It hasn't kept up with the times. And the two basic things that are lacking have to do with education about technology not just artificial intelligence, but all the technology that's involved with medicine these days. I mean, some are saying, essentially, sick care has turned into a data industry that happens to take care of patients. Well, how do you deal with that in terms of education? And the other is the business of medicine. I talk to a lot of doctors, and maybe you, and like, if you knew then what you know now, what do you wish you had been taught when you went through your professional education? Most of the time in the top three is I wish someone had taught me the business of something, medicine, dentistry, pharmacy, whatever. And that was going to make the biggest difference in my professional satisfaction and career success, instead of how many antidepressants could I prescribe for a given patient. So there's a big gap in what it is. So that's what I mean by curriculum.
Let me ask you a
And
question while you're
consequently,
there.
yeah, okay, I'm sorry.
So what do you think that's by design? Because it wouldn't
Of
be
course
hard for
it's by design. Who do you think develops, including me when I was an academic, who do you think designs these curricula? Now, why the curriculum is designed the way it is, again, multiple causes, but I think it has to do mostly with accreditation criteria. So if an accreditation body says you need to do this, this, and that, you're going to teach to the test and forget the rest.
Do you
So if
think
you're
that the
trying to
education
innovate in,
body would prescribe the medical school or dental school to
yeah, I'm
to
talking about the
educate the business?
AAMC or the accreditation for osteopathic medical schools or the accreditation organization for dental schools, they come up with a prescribed list of competencies and accreditation criteria that you have to demonstrate. I can tell you, because I do a lot of stuff with this. We can talk about some other time, but the point is that when you try to reform a medical school curriculum, you can pretty much guarantee people are going to ask similar questions. One is, how do we explain that we want to teach something that is not an accreditation requirement, and at the same time teach what is an accreditation requirement? There's only so much shelf space in the curriculum. There are only so many faculty that know how to teach XYZ.
Yeah, it's
So,
very curious to me that you get these doctors that come out of these professional schools. They have no business acumen. They get taken advantage of by every third party, from insurance companies to management companies to whoever these big pharma lobbies are, and everybody is in there. They're in their operatories, they're in their practices, and no accreditation body is seeing a need for business education and professional school.
right. So the first point when it comes to curriculum, which actually refers to medical education, training, development, is that it does not emphasize interprofessional, intra-professional collaboration. Now, some of that is changing. There's a lot of schools that have interprofessional academic entities that manage that stuff, but they're pretty far and few between. Number two, so when I refer to culture, the culture of medicine, some would refer to it as the dark underbelly of medicine. And again, I'm talking about medical school. Maybe it's the same in dental school. It's a culture of competition and conformity. I mean, when you're 8 years old and everybody's telling you you're the smartest kid in the room, you're competing against all these other people trying to get into medical school. You don't play nice with other people. It's a cutthroat business. And it's the same with dentistry and, with high demands, limited slots. It's supply and demand. And we don't want you, compared to the entrepreneurial culture, which is collaborative and creative. Now, you can't be too creative as a doctor, because there are standards appropriately. There are guardrails about what you can and cannot do. There are certain ethical precepts that you're expected to comply with. appropriately because we're dealing with people and their health. But it's a different mindset. And oh, by the way, no industry can be fixed from inside. So we have this mentality that, well, we're the doctors. We know everything. We know, I mean, we're the ones that are doing all this stuff. We know what we're supposed to teach. We know how to take care of patients. We know what we're doing. Don't tell us how to run our university. Well, that doesn't work because it gets them. So it creates these silos. And then, and not only that, so I'll tell you another story. It's not only cognitive silos, it's physical silos. So the University of Colorado 30 years ago had its campus in the middle of Denver, landlocked. They decided to move. Long story, but they did. They eventually moved to the Fitzsimmons campus, which is a square mile city that now is one of the major economic engines of the state. At the time, it was being considered physically uprooting one campus and moving it to another. The issue came up because there was a golf course. The old Fitzsimmons campus was an Army base, and they had a golf course that allowed veterans to play for virtually nothing. It was a perk for vets. And I thought it was, I used to play there. It was fun. It was like a public course, and it was easy, and it was cheap. So everybody went there. So during the conversations, I brought up, and some other people brought up the thing, well, how about if we use the golf course as a faculty center, like a faculty lounge, like a faculty center where people from different parts of the university could go and just sit down and get to meet each other and collaborate. Fast forward 30 years later, it's now scraped and it's a biotech park. Now, if you read Where Do Good Ideas Come From, it's a book about where do good ideas come from. One of the ways it happens are edge interfaces. In other words, and let me just say that the new campus has one area for clinical care, physically separated by another area for research, physically separated by another area for education. And there is no way that you can run into anybody anymore. So these happy accidents, these serendipitous conversations, these what do you do that leads to this, that leads to that, it's a physical, actually a physical separation. It has to do with the architecture of innovation. So it's a very simple example of how you can build in barriers to collaboration. And it costs a fortune to do that. I mean, they spend billions and billions of dollars on this place.
You know, billions and billions of dollars. There's a lot of interest. It's a lucrative business. Obviously, there are these third parties to try to wiggle themselves in. They participate in every aspect of these things we talk about. But without doctors and dentists and nurses and hygienists, there's no healthcare. So we're really in charge. Why do we allow this to happen? Okay, so entertain me. You're a doctor now, as a dentist, sitting there. You have a great idea. Where do you start? What would you do? Now, you
Well,
20 years ago or 30
yeah,
years ago.
so it starts with the why. So you have to ask yourself, um, if you're a health professional and you're thinking going down an entrepreneurial route, first of all, you need to understand what entrepreneurial route means. Just technically, what is the definition of physician or healthcare professional entrepreneurship? Because you ask 100 people, you get to 100 different answers. So I'm going to give you my definition. It's just my definition, which is based on my experience, is the pursuit of opportunity in this particular instance, sick care or healthcare, under volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous so-called VUCA conditions. It's a very unsteady environment, chaotic environment, with the goal, and this is the important part, of creating multiples of user-defined value compared to a competitive offering of the status quo, using a viable business model to achieve the sextuple aims. Now, That's a lot of words. And there's like 6 different parts to the definition. But the headline is A, what you think is valuable is absolutely irrelevant. The only thing that matters is whether the dog's going to eat the food. 2, you have to be at least 10 times better than somebody else to get their business. 3, you have to have a viable business model or else you go out of business. So there's 2 main reasons why companies fail. 1, they make a product no one wants to buy. 2, they don't have a viable business model, so they don't make money doing it, and you can't make it up in volume. And 3, they really don't help the system, the sextuple aim that I just mentioned before with artificial intelligence. So to get back to your question, so what should you think about? You need to think about, why are you doing this? Are you doing this because you want to make money? And how much? That's okay. It's America. We have capitalism. Sure, it's got its faults, but that's what we're talking about. Do you have what you need? Why do you want to do this? And basically, healthcare professionals do this for 2 reasons: because they want to or they have to. They want to for the reasons that I mentioned before. They want to change the world. They want to make a couple of bucks. They want to improve the human condition. They want to try to make a difference. But there are situations where you have to. You lose your medical license. You're disabled. You go through a crippling divorce. There's a death in the family. There's something happens that you're just forced. I mean, you could quit altogether. But there are a lot of situations where people do this because it's an option that they see as attractive. Now, once you decide why, or do you want to create a company and sell it for $1 trillion? Or do you want a lifestyle business and make a couple of bucks and fund your pension plan and spend more time with your family? Why are you doing this? Now, in my particular case, why am I doing this? I told you, because I'm pissed off. I don't think it's right. I don't think what we're seeing in sick care is right. And I just have this internal motivation to make it better. That's my deal. So everybody's got a separate deal. But you got to figure that out. Because once you decide to go down this road, it's really hard. So that means that you have to be mentally prepared and physically prepared to have the mindset, means, motivation, metrics, and monitoring systems to chart your path forward. Each one of those topics represents another podcast, but the headline to this is, the most important thing is, your clinical mindset will not make you successful as an entrepreneur alone. You have to have an entrepreneurial mindset that is totally different in some respects than a clinical mindset. And it's like 2 circles that are overlapping. They're characteristics of the clinical mindset, entrepreneurial mindset, and then there are parts that overlap. But one without the other isn't going to get you there.
Right, this is fantastic advice for our colleagues. And I strongly urge them to look at these articles that you have written. I'm running across another article where, in the same notion you mentioned, the article being titled How to Destroy Your Sick Care Innovation Silos and Live to Tell About Them. So your position is that, going in line with what you just said, that if you don't encourage and expand interdisciplinary collaboration with those in other industries, we will only make incremental progress in an industry that needs mega change, and needs it fast. So on one notion, on one hand, you're saying if you're doing it within your own profession, you need to collaborate with other doctors so they can figure out if the dog wants to eat the food, which is very important for it to succeed, and what your ultimate goals are. What about on a larger scale for healthcare? I don't know if you have kids or loved ones that you want to go into healthcare. I personally do. So that's a big motivator for me to maintain autonomy, to preserve the doctrines of medicine and healthcare. So, what's your position on that?
So my position is that uh, the way to, or a way to bring this transition or transformation about, it's really it's actually not that I mean, when people say it's not that complicated, it's always complicated, but it's not as difficult as you think it might be. And that is, fundamentally, what you're trying to do is get different people to talk to each other. You put them in the same room, you provide ways for them to communicate, and you simply let them talk to each other. Now, that gets to the issue of diversity, which is a toxic word in the present political environment. In my view, and it's just not my view, if you don't provide diversity, I'm talking about these diverse parts of the ecosystem, because you can't fix it from inside. So you have to connect outside in, inside out to these other elements of the ecosystem. Now, why should you do that? Well, there's actually three or four reasons. The basic reason is because the results are better when you have diversity in the conversation. Products are better, ideas are better, strategy and execution gets better, marketing gets better, economies get better, results get better. For the self-interest, if all you are interested in is getting better results and outcomes for whatever you're doing, the more diverse the people are doing it, the better. Now, what do I mean by diversity? I'm not just referring to the color of your skin or the place that you grew up or the language that you speak. That's demographic diversity. That's the least important part of diversity, which gets the most press and political whatever. But that's the least important part. The most important parts are functional diversity: sales, marketing, accounting, supply chain, finance, operations, product development. That's what I mean by functional diversity. Industry diversity: aerospace, nano, telecommunications, satellites, you name it. If you think that you're going to learn the next great innovation at a medical meeting, you are sorely mistaken. I mean, just think about how many medical innovations have occurred in the last 100 years that really move the needle. Anesthesia, vaccines and antibiotics, radiology. I mean, you can count them on one hand. So you have to go to places outside of your field. You want to see innovation in digital health, go to the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas. That's where you're going to see it. You want to see the next innovation in medicine, keep your eye on what people are thinking about building when we no longer need iPhones, in terms of what artificial intelligence is going to do with how we communicate with the world and with each other. So that's another point. So there's demographic diversity, there's functional diversity, there's industry diversity, and probably the most important one is cognitive diversity. You want people in your team that think differently than you do. You don't want people that are just yes people and they brainstorm and they just say what the CEO said, all that stuff. So that's what's being lost in this diversity conversation. The demographic part, I mean, sure, it's a social justice issue, but forget that. If you don't believe in that, try to believe in the understanding this is going to make outcomes better.
This is such a great advice. I'm resonating with you because I go to a fastener show every year. I'm very interested in industrial fasteners and robotics and such. And they're always surprised that I'm the only dentist that's running around there. And but I take innovation from those fastener events, and it's fascinating what these companies are thinking about designs and robotics and aerodynamics
Right.
and so on. And so I go to that every year, sometimes twice in
Sure.
different locations.
And
So that's a
dentistry,
great advice.
yeah, and dentistry is a great example because you guys are all involved with material science. You're interested in polymers. You're interested in all the chemicals. Bonding agents, all that stuff. Mechanical devices and in orthodontics. All and actually ENT doctors and ophthalmologists. We're all sort of gadgeteers, and we like seeing gadgets and toys and surgical instruments and fooling around with them and how do we make them better and all that stuff. So
Yes. So what do you say to the guy that goes to an attorney and the attorney says, "Don't tell anything to anybody," and then they have this sort of presence of paranoia that all of their ideas will be stolen and somebody's going to run off with it and they're going to be
right,
left behind. What do you say
right.
to them?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, in some instances, it's critically important that you protect your intellectual property. In other instances, it's not that big of a deal because, frankly, what you're trying to do is not patent, or there's a whole bunch of issues in terms of is it really worth it. So, what I say is it depends on your situation, but in general, um, innovate your heart at, but don't tell anybody you're doing. In other words, you can give them the broad strokes, just don't give them the secret sauce because you never
So,
know if this thing turns out to be a commercializable idea and you've already put it in the public domain, you're screwed. So generally, don't tell people the secret sauce about what you're doing. Now, some people take that. That does not mean that when you do a startup, you should keep it dark. In other words, we're not going to tell anybody what we're doing until we're ready to launch it. Well, that kind of goes against a basic precept of lean startup methodology, which is you want to get as much input as possible about what you're thinking from the end user. You want to get like 100 customer discovery interviews and be honest. Like, I'm a grown up. Tell me what you think of this, or how are you dealing with this problem now? Well, if you don't do the customer discovery to inform your business model and validate the underlying hypotheses, you're working at a disadvantage. And it's one of the reasons why people wind up creating products that no one wants to buy because they didn't ask people what they wanted. They just assumed this is a great idea. You're going to love this. I'll build it and you're come. No, they won't. So I have some problems with that. But to answer your question more directly, it's it's safer not to tell people about your idea than to tell people.
understood. So there'll be three articles I'll put up in the comments section for the partners to look at for our constituents. The last article I wanted to address is how to close the data that you've written, that the doctor, data scientist, bioengineer divide. So you go on explaining all of the different ways we could close that divide. You make a very interesting statement at the end of the article. You say hope is not a strategy. Technology alone will not get us out of the sick care mess or the global warming mess. People will, but only if they play nice with each other. What do you mean by that, and how can that be achieved?
Well, I mean, the conversation now is about data scientists and data engineers, working in collaboration with end user clinicians. Now, artificial intelligence spans a lot of operational, financial, but let's just talk about how do data scientists and people in computer science and engineering deal with and collaborate with health professionals and vice versa. So the way this has been described is how do we get to a point where doctors and data scientists, as an example, are bilingual without an accent. In other words, they understand each other's language. I mean, you're not going to go to France and be fluent, but you learn a certain bonjour and merci. You learn a couple of words in the lingo just so you can get by and sort of understand what the heck they're talking about, and vice versa. Part of the reason that non-sick care entrepreneurs, and that by that I mean tech bros and people who are not healthcare professionals, have made $1 billion selling shoes on the internet, and they decide that wasn't so hard. I can do this in sick care. No, you can't. A, because sick care ain't Uber, and B, because if you don't understand the ecosystem and you don't understand the workflow and the mentality and the mindset of healthcare professionals, that usually results in failure, and vice versa. So, for the good of the outcome and the ultimate end user, i.e., the patient, it behooves us to be able to collaborate. Now, there are multiple ways to do that. Again, it's really about getting people in the same room and just collaborating, just talking to each other. What are you doing? I don't understand that word. What do you mean by that? Where do I go to learn about it, et cetera? There's a lot of examples that I cited in the interview. One is you bring data scientists along in rounds. It's an old biodesign platform idea where you're a data engineer. You don't know squat about congestive heart failure. You don't know how to say it. I don't know how to say most words in computerese, but you're going to go on rounds with this. And I just want you, from a data scientist perspective, to understand what I'm dealing with when I make rounds in the ICU. You got a million gadgets, a million monitors, data all over the place. It's an extremely data dense environment. Help me understand what I can do with this. It's like a clinical pharmacist that makes rounds with you, and there's a gazillion drugs, and you can't keep track of them all, but you ask this person, what do you think? This patient's on 17 different medications. Give me the inside baseball. What do I need to know? Drug-drug interactions, if dose is right, can we do something different? Patient's not responding. Give me some ideas, that kind of thing. I just think and this means industry academic collaboration, knowledge transfer programs. How about if we allow faculty like me do a sabbatical at Google and allow somebody at Google to do a sabbatical in the Department of Otolaryngology? Now, there are other countries that do a much better job of this than we do. In fact, we provide barriers between doctors working with industry. We expose them as profiteers because they're taking money from industry. And we shame them. And we ban them from working on speakers bureaus for pharma companies. Now, I'm not saying there are not ethical problems with physician, pharma, medtech, quote, collaborations. I'm just saying that you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It's hard to collaborate when you stigmatize collaboration.
Yes. But how do you sort out the ones that have a good intent towards our industry or versus the ones that are trying to subdue us into factory workers, you know?
Why is it so hard to do the right thing? So that gets down to ethics and morals. That gets down to standards of professional behavior. But you don't throw out, and we're facing that with artificial intelligence. I mean, this $1 trillion AI company went bankrupt
That
a
fast?
couple of days. Yeah, a couple of days ago. There was this thing, not a trillion. It was only, what was it? It was, the value was 1.3 billion, and they went bankrupt. They overstated their earnings. They had customers they didn't have. I mean, it's what I call Therontology. Like, you haven't learned the lessons of Theranos. Why is it so hard for people to do the right thing? Well, that just has to do with professional ethics and behavior. I don't know how you get people to do the right thing. I'm just saying that that's part of the drill. That's what you're supposed to do as a healthcare professional. Unfortunately, there are some folks that don't believe that.
Yes, but especially collaboration with outsiders that are non-licensed, non-doctors, that becomes a challenge given that they have also contributed to this mayhem that we have seen in the last few
Right.
decades in the
And
industry.
that gets to another. So this gets back to the why do we have silos? And I call this the third number. The first was curriculum, the second was culture, the third is context. What do I mean by context? I mean the state of the world. And right now, there is so much polarization in the world, let alone the United States, and all that's going on with wars and global warming and all the problems that we've all become very tribal.
Yeah.
And that discourages collaboration and it's very stressful. And as we all know, the response to stress is fight, flight, or freeze. Now, I think we are frozen. People are scared to death. So what do? I can't get my arms around inflation. I can't get my arms around the administration. I can't. What do I do about global warming and inflation and all these other problems? And it's just really stressful to undergo all this change fatigue. So people are virtually paralyzed. They're afraid to come out of their box. And that discourages collaboration. I call this the lost tribe of medicine, let alone interprofessional collaboration. People just stick to their knitting, they hunker down until the chaos settles down. So I think that's another reason why we see these innovations. Now, so what do we do about all this? I mean, I don't want to leave this thing with all this doom and gloom. Oh my God, the sky's falling, I'm going to eat worms. This is not a new problem. This is something that goes back 3,000 years to Stoic philosophy. Stuff happens. Deal with it. That's the basic Cliff's Notes of Stoic philosophy. This goes back to Marcus Aurelius and all these people. So, and then that was updated with Drucker when, he wrote a book, Managing in Turbulent Times. The fundamental notion is see the change as an opportunity, not as a threat. And if you go through his books and you read all this stuff, we've seen this over and over and over again. We've seen this movie before. And oh, by the way, these are oftentimes the best times to create startups for a number of reasons. And if you look at companies that have become multi-trillion-dollar entities, they were created during recessions. So you have to have a positive attitude. But my final thought on this is I tell people you have to make it personal, but don't take it personally. What do I mean by that? I mean, this, because of all the reasons that I've discussed, this is hard. And you have to have a pretty strong intrinsic motivation to keep doing it. But you don't take it personally because 99 times out of 100, you're going to fail. I have a failure resume the length of my arm that I included in my CV, actually. But if you learn from those mistakes and you do something about it to fix it, to try not for it to happen again. So in medicine, it's like if you're not doing enough cases, if you don't have any complications, you're not doing enough cases. So you just don't take it personally. You just have to keep doing this. And ultimately, you can give up on your idea, but don't give up on yourself.
Good point. Have you ever done like a series for entrepreneurs in terms of I mean, this is a wealth of information that you brought today, and there's not enough time to actually go through the million questions I have for you. But can you give us a very quick, as we're coming up on the hour, very quick idea of what my colleagues and friends can expect of joining SOAP and to get started with their ideas and innovations and collaborations and
Sure.
learn. You know, one thing I wanted to add to this is at the beginning of the conversation, you said, what would have all these doctors wanted to do differently? For me, if I could have had 20 years ago before I started clinical practice, if I could have had a mentor over those years, I would have saved millions of dollars of mistakes I've made. So, you know, now here we are, and I'm still surrounding myself with people that are smarter than me and are more knowledgeable and experienced than me. And that's been my key to success. What can you tell the doctors that are coming into SOAP how they can prevent the same mistakes we have made?
Right.
And
Um, so A, follow the 70-20-10 rule. What does that mean? It means that adults learn the most, 70% of what adults learn comes from experience. Albert Einstein thought everything people learn comes from experience. Experience is the only teacher. That's what he said. I don't necessarily believe all that, but who might argue with Einstein? But the point is, 70% of what we learn as adults comes from experience. Two, 20% comes from the people that we interact with, to your mentoring point. Three, 10% comes from what we learn in school, in a classroom. Bottom line, don't let school get in the way of your education. So, what does SOAP provide? First of all, the mission of SOAP is to help members helping members get their ideas to patients. We've just explained the process of various aspects of that. And we provide education, both real-time, face-to-face, and virtually, and access to resources, networks, mentors, experience, peer support, and non-clinical career guidance. So it's an ecosystem of ecosystems because it's an open innovation network for the reasons that I've explained. It can't be fixed from inside. If it were just doctors leading doctors, it would be the blind leading the blind. You have to have these other people involved in the game. And that's what we have created internationally to the tune of about 150 to 200,000 people on social media. But you got to be careful what you ask for. Again, it gets to the why. Why do you want to do this? And are you prepared to take the journey and learn how to do it?
Excellent. I highly recommend our colleagues to do the same thing and join the organization. And you surely will hear from Arlen, as I have, and can take your ideas to the next level. Dr. Arlen, I really appreciate you coming on today for taking time out of your schedule. And you have a little bit of something in your heart regarding dentistry in your past, so my colleague will really appreciate that.
Yeah.
And we hope to have you soon again. And I understand you're going to be holding a session in Europe for SOAP London, and our colleagues there can also join that event. And we will post those regularly on the Global Summit page. Thank you for your time and for all that you do for our profession.
Well, you too. Thanks for all your hard work, and I look forward to mutual collaboration.
Likewise, thank you.